Shalom and welcome to the first Middle East report of 2026. And in this program we shall be unpacking the dramatic events that occurred in Israel, the Middle East and the Jewish community in 2025 as we review the year. And in this program today I'm joined by my two very close friends. They are Sharon Klaff from Campaign for Truth, representing the Jewish community, and my good friend Robin Benson, who's a Christian supporter of Israel. So warm welcome to the program and Happy New Year, Shana Tova. So this is the first Middle East report of 2026. Sharon, give us your thoughts and your reflections on the dramatic year that has been 2025. We consider the war in Gaza, the plight of the hostages, the pandemic of Jew hatred, the attack on the Jewish community in Manchester as well as in Australia, and also the fact that Israel saved the world in 2025 by preventing a nuclear holocaust by taking out Iran's nuclear weapons program. Give us your thoughts and reflection on 2025.
Okay, so every year we start the year looking forward with hope and expectation of something good to come out of the year. And for me, that started with the inauguration of President Trump. I looked so forward to him coming back and dealing with our very distraught world. And so I started the year beginning very positively, and then the hostages came out, first with Emily Damari, and so we went down the year. And then we heard about the Bibas babies. And I still can't picture them in my mind. But then we went on and things seemed to President Trump was doing a lot. Israel beat Hamas and Iran, battled with Iran and came out after 12 days, another miracle. And then we go forward to Manchester and the attack started again. And of course in between that we had Washington and we had attacks across the world, but then Manchester happened here in the UK. And that was quite devastating for everybody. And a couple of days ago, first night of Hanukkah, there we went in Australia. And so it seems that this global intifada is now in full force, attacking Jews. And I think for the first time, after this year of expectation, getting to the end of the year, and for the first time, many Jews are talking about leaving. People who never spoke about it before, never thought about it before, going to Israel. I think many were talking about perhaps going to America, but I think that's increasingly off the cards as well. So I don't know what 2026 is going to bring us. I'm hoping that the world will wake up, that the leadership will wake up, that Australia, the UK, France, Canada will change their leadership, will learn something, will hear what's going on in the world and stop blaming the Jews for the woes that we all face.
Absolutely. And Robin, Happy New Year for 2026. Give us your thoughts and your reflections on this truly dramatic year in the Middle East. And of course, as Sharon mentioning, we have seen the return of President Trump, and everything that is with him has shaken up the entire world order.
Yeah, he has created a lot of controversy. As Sharon said, a lot of positive expectation when he arrived on the scene, but I think that's taken a few dents over the last 12 months. It's hard to sum up 12 months because it's been a series of highs and lows, and just it's been dizzying trying to keep track of it all, because events seem to have accelerated it in a way that I don't think any of us ever anticipated, ever expected we would ever see in our lifetimes. And I'm thinking of that obviously from a Christian perspective, a biblical perspective, but just world events. There's so much going on our planet at the moment that is confusing, contradictory, creating a lot of anguish and frustration and anger. And a lot of that, unfortunately, is being vented on the Jewish community worldwide. I mean, you've highlighted some of the individual incidents that we'll probably look at in the time that we have together, but that's only a drop in the bucket in comparison to the weekly protests against Israel and the venomous hatred that's been expressed in city after city after city worldwide. And, you know, the Jewish people have had to try to cope with that wherever they are. And and the aftermath of so many of these awful incidents. Yeah.
And we saw, as we look back at January 2025, we saw the re-emergence of President Trump being inaugurated on the 20th of January as America's 47th president, and no one thought that he would be back in the White House. And this is the first video that he posted on YouTube to say that America's back. So in January 25, we saw the return of President Trump on the world stage. And of course, what did he do? He introduced tariffs that literally shook the whole world up. He talked about pulling US troops out of Europe to force European nations to more defense commitment regarding the defense of Europe through NATO. But also the one thing that President Trump and his teams, particularly Steve Witkoff, did as his special envoy, effectively his Secretary of State. Even before President Trump was in, he was threatening Hamas to release the hostages. Share with us the impact that he had in helping to bring the hostages home in that early release, which happened with our own Emily Damari, who was released on the 19th of January 2025, one day before President Trump's inauguration.
I think the world expected a repeat of President Trump's first term, where he seemed to be flailing around. He wasn't familiar with what happened in Washington, and he didn't quite know how to choose his team. And I don't think people realized that he had spent that time between 2020 and 2024. He had spent that time preparing, and he prepared so well. He had everything ready. He had his team ready. He had his policies ready. He had the actions that he was going to take ready. He was signing executive order after executive order from the very get-go. Right after inauguration, he was at that desk signing. And I think the world saw there a man who hit the ground running, who was top of his team. He was going to be team captain. And I think he made it very clear that this was a different president. This president was not going to allow the demise of Western civilization. And that's really the message that I took from him. And I know that many people are skeptical about his methods, but this is the man who practices the art of the deal. And he knows how to cajole, he knows how to punch when he has to. And I think we just need to have trust in him, that he's going in the right direction, and hopefully will deal with a world that's ostensibly falling apart, and that he's going to hold it together.
Absolutely. And Robin, just share with us your thoughts on your reflections, how the Trump administration's brought back the first wave of Israeli hostages held by Hamas in Gaza ever since that horrific day on October the 7th. And of course, our own Emily Damari, who's a British Israeli, came home, which was a massive answer to our prayers.
Yeah, I think, as Sharon has said, Mr. Trump came in strong, and I would say that the initial threats, let's use that word in inverted commas, that he made towards Hamas as regards the hostages and even the whole situation in Gaza seems initially to have borne fruit. And there's no question about that. So we must never in any way undercut the impact of that. But I think many of us are disappointed also that there were these strong verbal threats that actually were never backed up by action. Or the perception is that actually Israel was held back from doing what it needed to do in certain circumstances in order to take those threats and make them real. I mean, we sort of lost track of the number of times Mr. Trump said all hell was going to be let loose on the Gaza Strip, and it never happened. And it sort of undermines, I think, to a certain extent, the authority that this man has And then we've seen other things happen in the year, which we'll probably talk about as we go on, that have, in the estimation of many Christian supporters, have called into question, does he really understand the Middle Eastern mindset? And taking what Sharon has said about this idea of the deal, does it work in a Middle East context? And I think there's a big question mark over that. But yes, he's got another two and a bit years to go, so we just have to wait and see how it works out. But there are holes in this situation that create questions and problems.
Yeah, okay, so from my perspective, I am very concerned about Steve Witkoff, who's in the pay of the Qataris because they bailed him out of a big property deal.
Yeah.
So the Qataris have huge influence over him. Gerald Kushner as well, he's been influenced by the Qataris and Tony Blair, and I'm concerned then the reconstruction of Gaza, for example, will actually be done to save Hamas because they're the Muslim Brotherhood and the Qataris have that interest, and talking about bringing in Turkish or Azeri forces to be peacekeepers is frightening because those two nations are heavily Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah, well, you've itemized some of the concerns that many of us have that unfortunately are flowing out of the White House at the present time. Yeah.
So in February of 2025, we saw that President Trump invited the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, for talks in the White House, and the Israeli Prime Minister was the first world leader to meet President Trump. So share with us the fact that if we compare, for example, very briefly, President Biden, who didn't call the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for about 6 weeks after his inauguration, didn't have anything to do with him. And then we see that President Trump returns back in the White House and the first world leader that he meets is Benjamin Netanyahu to strengthen the American-Israeli strategic relationship and friendship. Share with us how significant that was.
Well, this really explains what Robin was talking about, that many of us out there who aren't involved very deeply, intimately with this situation, need to see what's actually going on. The fact that he did invite Netanyahu first to the White House. And this goes back to their relationship because they've known each other since they were young lads. Their families have known each other. They understand each other. And I think what we see with Netanyahu and President Trump are the good cop, bad cop arrangement. And I think that they leak certain information to the media to confuse. But behind the scenes, I think they both know exactly what they're doing. President Trump, I think, knows that he's got to save Western civilization, the Judeo-Christian ethic. He knows that. He knows what jihad means. He knows, well, illustrated in Syria when they killed a few Americans just a few days ago. He knows all of that. And I think he also, to a certain extent, trusts Netanyahu, who has relationships with Russia, has relationships with China. So I think they work together as an incredible team. President Trump is a manager. He doesn't need to have intimate details about anything. He needs to know who to call in and who to trust. I also have reservations about Witkoff and the son-in-law. But I think on reflection that he uses them because they have those intimate relationships. He knows how they can go into those situations, be welcomed, and come back with information for him so that he can play his dominoes and his card games.
Absolutely. So also we saw during this time that President Trump made his historic visit to the Middle East. He met the leaders of Saudi Arabia, he met the leaders of Qatar and also the United Arab Emirates, but didn't visit Israel. And so there was a huge speculation during this time that there was a big rift between President Netanyahu and the President of the United States by not visiting Israel. It caused a lot of hurt, it caused a lot of pain inside Israel. And of course, Christian supporters and Jewish supporters of Israel were thinking, why has Trump done this? But we also know that this was part of the mass deception to make it look like there were strategic differences in the relationship between Netanyahu and President Trump to actually then take on the Iranians, but we'll get onto that later. But share with us as well the horrific news story of February 2025. And this was that for example, on the 1st of February, Yardin Bibas was released and alive after 484 days. held captive by Hamas, and he was greeted by his sister and his father. Then later that month, on the 20th of February, Hamas returned the bodies of the two Bibas children, Ariel 4 and Kafir 1, and forensic evidence confirmed that they'd been murdered during that captivity. And literally seeing these iconic children and their faces was the image of October the 7th. We all hoped and prayed that they'd come back alive, but they came back in coffins. Share with us how devastating this was for Israel and the Jewish community and Christian supporters around the world to know that these beautiful babies and beautiful children came back dead in coffins.
I don't know how to answer that question, Simon, because I've been part of prayer groups every week praying for Israel and the Jewish people since a couple of days after October the 7th. And right in the build-up to these events in February, there was this heightened expectation that these kids were okay and that they were going to be returned home. And when they weren't, people were just heartbroken. I mean, literally weeping. And part of it's the media, because they hype everything up. And the media hyped up the possibility that these kids and their mother would be returned. And of course, when it didn't happen, it's like plunging into a pit of emotional distress. And as you said before we started recording the program, it created a lot of anger and frustration on the part of many people who support Israel and the Jewish people, because we were played. The world was played by Hamas and its allies in the Gaza Strip into thinking that this release was coming in. Of course, it didn't happen. Yeah.
And also share with us your thoughts as a Jewish mother that these poor baby and baby Kafir and Ariel, who was a toddler, came home in coffins. And what matters worse is that the forensics said that they were actually strangled, but Hamas claimed that an Israeli missile had landed on the building and killed them. And so therefore they knew that they killed them, and they made it look like they were killed in an airstrike. But what they did to these children was beyond horrific.
So we all got used to, as Robin said, used to these beautiful children running with their Batman capes, playing with their parents, loving them, singing to them. And I certainly just hoped and prayed that they were going to be alive. And then we saw those coffins, those little coffins that Hamas just were swinging between them with no respect. And then we heard how they bashed the bodies. And then we heard that they sent the wrong mother, sent the wrong body. And they knew it. So when you say that they were playing the world, it's astounding that the world is marching pro-Palestine, pro-Hamas, and not seeing what they actually did, what kind of human beings can behave in this way. It's almost indescribable. There are no words to explain the evil that they got up to, the pain that they cause everybody, that their minds can even think of doing things like this. So I still feel devastated. When I see pictures of them, I just cry. And what can you say? That poor father has to live his life knowing what they did to his children.
Yeah. But what's worse as well,
wife.
Hamas didn't tell them that they were killed in captivity. No, I shouldn't say killed. Let's use the proper terminology. Murdered in captivity by Hamas. And that he felt and had that hope that they would be alive. Yeah. So came back when he was released. He literally felt that he would be reunited with his family, but instead they came back in coffins, which was actually truly horrific and appalling.
And the display.
Yeah. And just share with us how this had such a huge, devastating psychological impact upon Israel and the Jewish community worldwide, as well as the Christian community who've been loving and praying and supporting in Israel. And I remember that President Milei of Argentina had images of the Bibas boys just lit up on the main square in Buenos Aires in support of the Bibas family, in support of Israel. Sadly, our mainstream media, so many churches remained quiet. This was a time not to remain silent.
It was, but again, going back on what Sharon said, Hamas are masters at the art of media manipulation. And they manipulated everybody. I mean, they manipulated the Jewish population in Israel or the Israeli population. They manipulated the Jewish population worldwide. They manipulated the Christian population worldwide. They manipulated the world with these false hopes and then dashed them. So, yeah.
And they're still doing it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's not stopped. It's ongoing.
So this is thanks to the Israeli Foreign Ministry, and let's remind ourselves of that horrific day back in February when the Bibas boys came back, not alive, but in coffins.
Fear and Ariel, our sweethearts, we hope that in that moment, all you felt was the certainty that your mother would make everything right. We pray that you thought maybe it was just a game, that soon it would be over, and you'd go back to simply playing in the garden with Mom and Dad. We hope you were able to close your eyes and not look into the face of this inhumane evil. We prayed, we hoped, and we never believed this is how it would end. Shiri Bibas, we promise you that just as you fought and protected your children against this monstrous evil, we will not stop until Hamas no longer exists. Kfir Bibas, Ariel Bibas, Shiri Bibas, rest in peace.
And that was courtesy of the Israeli Foreign Ministry. And yes, what Hamas did to the Bibas family is evil and horrific. And the world needs to wake up, because if children are treated like that and the world is silent, then that just really does show the shocking state of moral affairs in our nation. But thanks to President Malay, who really did have a day to honour the Bibas family by having a day of mourning, but no other nation did the same. Moving on to April of 2025, and what we saw in April of 25 was a number of fires break out in the Judean mountains, in Judea and Samaria, leading to a national emergency, and Israel even called for international aid request. And then on the 30th of April 2025, Israel celebrated her 77th birthday as a modern state in fulfillment of biblical prophecy. But because of the war still going on in Gaza, with so many Israelis suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, the country in flux and chaos, it wasn't that much of a happy occasion. But share with us the incredible achievements that Israel's achieved over the past 77 years.
Well, where do I start? Firstly, it exists. It came back in 1948. That was a miracle, that these people who had come out of Europe, who had had no money, had no means to fight a war, actually beat 5 Arab armies that were well equipped by the world. So we start with that. That's what Israel achieved. And then we go through the years. I think the next big achievement was the Six-Day War. That miracle of going back into Jerusalem, which then they should have declared united and Israel's sovereign territory, and we take back the Temple Mount. That's ours. We're not giving it to the Waqf. Big mistake they made. They didn't achieve that. They didn't achieve by annexing the land that they'd conquered. Because in war, when you conquer land, it becomes yours. So that they didn't achieve, but they'd hoped to achieve peace by giving some of it back. But I think a lot of the big achievements, apart from the success of the 710 fight back, a lot of the achievements are in science and medicine, and two that spring to mind is the new eye drop that you can drop in your eye and you can see. You won't need glasses in the future.
Wow.
Can you imagine that?
Wow, very cool.
And the other very big one is for people who can't walk because they've severed their spinal cord. They apparently are now just getting there, that they can actually regrow those cells, and people who cannot walk will be able to walk again. So this is, imagine, I've said it to you before, Simon, imagine if there wasn't a Holocaust, where the world would be with innovation like this. Imagine.
Innovation, all intellectual thinking, businesses, arts, entertainment, the world will be transformed. definitely, 100% on that one. It's also interesting statistics. So at Israel at 77, the Central Bureau of Statistics announced that on the eve of Israel's 77th anniversary, the population of Israel is estimated to be at 10 million and 94 million. And that's 7.732 million Jews, and others represents 77.6. I mean, it's an incredible achievement, isn't it? That we've seen that Israel has made the desert bloom, that Israel is a democracy, that Israel is a beacon of light in a very dark region of the world in the Middle East. Israel is an economic, political, and military powerhouse. And that land has come alive once its rightful owners are back in the land, which is the Jewish people.
Yeah, I mean, we need to go back to Genesis 12, verse 3. God promises Abraham to make his descendants many, but to make them a blessing to the rest of humanity, to all the families of the earth. And between us, we have itemized about that much of the blessing that the Jewish people have been to humanity long before 1948, but certainly since 1948. You know, there's a website, Good News from Israel, and the British guy who runs it sends out an email every week, Michael Ordman, and he lists all the new developments that are coming out of Israel. And if you printed it out, it's probably 2 or 3 A4 sides. That's every week. And those are given to the rest of the world by the Jewish people. It's astounding, you know, that we see that ancient promise literally coming true before our very eyes, week after week after week.
Absolutely. So let's have a look at this remarkable and inspirational video produced by the Israeli Defense Force that marks Israel at 77.
We cherish our land, our home, all of the things we have built upon it. We persevere. Take care of our wounds. We never give up. We defend our home. We remember those who sacrificed everything. We keep fighting for the small moments that make life here worth everything. We lift each other up. In those small moments, we lean on each other because it is our duty to raise the spirit of a nation that never stops believing. So what really is independence? It is waking up every morning with one mission: to fight for our country and to love it even harder. And if someone asks what independence is, just tell them. You have to live here to understand.
So that was courtesy of our friends at the Israeli Defense Force, and did the Israeli army show bravery and courage in the face of such evil in confronting Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the Iranian regime, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, and even kind of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and Israel defeated all of them. And because of their bravery and their courage, and we salute the brave men and women who serve with the IDF, and I'm proud to be associated with the IDF. Sharon, also in June, sadly we had another tragedy occur, in May we had another tragedy occur. So this was on the 22nd of May, A young couple who worked for the Israeli embassy have been shot dead outside of a Jewish museum in Washington, D.C. The police say the victims, Yoron Yalinsky and Sarah Lynn Milgram, were killed by a man who shouted "Free, free Palestine" while he was arrested. Alias Rodriguez has been charged with first-degree murder. I know the embassy, the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. I know that whole area. And so for me personally, this came as a big shock as well. Share with us your thoughts on how this hatred that we've seen spill out on the streets around the world, in our capitals around the world, led to the murder of these Israeli diplomats.
Well, this hatred, this Free Palestine hatred, has been brewing, as we know, for over 20 years. And around about 2018, when I first noticed that what was that were demonstrations that you could go to and make your case and come home and be safe, were beginning to change. They were beginning to be violent. They were beginning to be threatening. And even then, the police in the UK used to rush us out to save us, escort us to tube stations, to our cars and so on. So we're talking about 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, when they were beginning to be dangerous. So for me, it wasn't unexpected. This whole Free Palestine chanting is the brand of the BDS, of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, that has been ultimately successful. And it was inevitable that this was going to happen. And why a man called Elias Rodriguez, who I would imagine was born a Catholic, would be wanting to free Palestine in America, explains it all. What really have the three got to do with each other? Why would this man be there to murder? I think one was an American, one was an Israeli. They weren't both Israelis.
And they were about to get
and one was Christian and one was Jewish.
Yep.
So why would this man want to murder two strangers on the doorsteps of an embassy in America, crying for the freedom of a country that doesn't exist? Coming from a Catholic root, what does it mean to him? What was he paid to do it? Why would he be there? This is the question I would like to ask, and I'd like to find an answer to it, because he's not alone. Most of these people who chant in our streets are people like Elias Rodriguez. They carry Irish names, English names, French names. They have nothing to do with the area. They have nothing to do with the religion. They have nothing to do with the cause. And yet they seem to think that they can devote their lives to freeing a country or a place that doesn't exist.
And Robin, I mean, we have to really touch on, I think, some of the incitement here, particularly the murder of these two young Israeli diplomats who were on the verge of getting married. They were going to go a week later out to Jerusalem to meet the parents to say that they were getting married, and they were just cut down in their prime. Share with us how really insidious the social media has become, and particularly when we hear chants of globalize the intifada, effectively means the calling for genocide against Jewish people around the world.
Well, one of the interesting things that has come out of the little bit of investigation that has been done into the effects of social media is often people chanting these chants haven't got a clue where Palestine is. They don't know where it is, but somehow they get drawn into, I suppose through their networks of social media, into the cause. And it seems like so many people in the 21st century are desperate to associate themselves with a cause. And this is the cause of the day, Israel and the Palestinians. And we've talked about this before in other programs, the influence that social media has and has had right since October the 7th, October the 8th. They were already launched out with campaigns on all streams of social media, within a few hours of the October 7th massacre. And how do you stop it? You can't. You try to put out truth to counteract it, but the problem is that unless people are listening, watching both sides of the argument, they're only going to feed on the negative. And the things that we've seen happen are as a result.
Absolutely.
People just absorb this negativity, this hatred, this
And unfortunately, with the algorithms work on social media, they will keep getting the videos of what they want to see.
It's true.
They start going down these dark, dangerous rabbit holes, and then they get more and more of these videos, more and more intoxicated with these lies and manipulation. But also, it's interesting to know the Chinese, the Iranians, the Qataris are pumping billions of money into social media against Israel. Now,
I would like to say something about that, because I think talking about social media in this way is a little bit like talking about the gun being responsible for killing the people. And I think we can't give a bye to human beings who are ultimately the evildoers. The social media is just a platform. It's the town square. The Maccabees didn't have social media. Hitler didn't have social media. And yet they managed to get the masses to chant their chants, whatever it was, their cause, to carry their cause. And I think it's the people that we've got to think about, not so much the social media, but the people who are so willing to be indoctrinated, who are, and the one thing social media does do is give them an international platform, that's for sure. But they're so willing not to go and do proper reading, doing their own research, but they're just willing to jump on a cause. And our Greta Thunberg is one of those. I mean, here was a girl who could have been the world's savior. She was on top of everything. Grown men were welcoming her into the highest echelons of leadership. And suddenly she puts on a kafir and she changes direction to what?
Okay, so, she was the biggest embarrassment of
the biggest embarrassment of the year, exactly.
Leading that flotilla of one bag of aid to Gaza to liberate Gaza and to give the Gazans that much needed aid. And of course, it didn't happen twice. Anyway, so let's move on to June, and the biggest dramatic event of the year occurred, known as Operation Rising Lion. And this was 2 decades in the making, when Israel decided enough was enough. It's time to take out Iran's nuclear weapons program and not only save Israel, but save the world from a nuclear holocaust. Take a look.
Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, a targeted military operation to roll back the Iranian threat to Israel's very survival. For decades, the tyrants of Tehran have brazenly, openly called for Israel's destruction. They've backed up their genocidal rhetoric with a program to develop nuclear weapons. In recent years, Iran has produced enough highly enriched uranium for 9 atom bombs. 9. We struck at the heart of Iran's nuclear enrichment program. We struck at the heart of Iran's nuclear weaponization program. We targeted Iran's main enrichment facility in Natanz. We targeted Iran's leading nuclear scientists working on the Iranian bomb. We also struck at the heart of Iran's ballistic missile program. I want to assure the civilized world, we will not let the world's most dangerous regime get the world's most dangerous weapons. The increasing range of Iran's ballistic missiles would bring that nuclear nightmare to the cities of Europe and eventually to America. Remember, Iran calls Israel the small Satan. It calls America the great Satan. Never again is now. Today, Israel has shown that we have learned the lessons of history. When enemies vow to destroy you, believe them. When enemies build weapons of mass death, stop them. As the Bible teaches us, when someone comes to kill you, rise and act first.
So thank you, Israel, for saving the world in 2025, preventing the world's most dangerous regime acquiring the world's most dangerous weapon, nuclear weapons. Now, this was a 12-day military operation, the likes we've never seen before in military history. And what Israel did was nothing less than sensational. But what I like about Israel's attack on Iran, not that I like Israel attacking any nation, but we know that this is a demonic, evil nation that wants to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. But the fact that the Israelis targeted the notorious evil in prison, blew its doors off. Netanyahu himself spoke in Persian to say that you are not our enemy, only the regime is. Share with us your thoughts on really how the international community should have thanked Israel from saving the world from a nuclear holocaust and preventing these ayatollahs from achieving nuclear breakout and having the ability to fire nuclear weapons and to blackmail nations with that threat of a nuclear annihilation.
Well, the logistics of the campaign over the 12 days are astounding, and there's no doubt that military historians who pick these things apart are going to take years to look at what Israel did, because Israel ensured that when the American B-2 bombers came and then actually took out the nuclear facilities, there was nothing to stop them. So Israel paved the way. Israel did all the hard work. All the planes returned. There was no losses, another miracle. But Israel ensured then that when the B-2s came, that there was nothing to stop them doing the actual damage, okay? I'm sorry, I'm going to throw something into the wheel here, because there was more that needed to be done, and Israel was prevented from finishing the job, as we now know. Even the International Atomic Energy Agency admits that Iran was able to take away multiple kilograms of processed uranium, and Iran is now hell-bent, pardon the expression, on revitalizing its ballistic missile program and its nuclear program. And it looks like, to me and to many others, that Israel is going to have to go back in and do it all over again. Now, who stopped them? Who stopped them from finishing the job? Only one man sitting in Washington, D.C. And there's a repeating pattern here with this man.
But I don't think this would ever happen under the Biden administration.
No, I totally agree with you, Simon.
Yeah,
but the job wasn't finished. That's the problem.
Yeah, and Israel will finish the job.
Well, we trust them.
And if it's in the next coming year, but it looks like they put back their nuclear program by at least 10 years.
Definitely.
But also share with us the horrific difference between the Iranian regime and Israel, because the Iranian regime deliberately fired at Israel's population centers, and of course we saw the Israelis run to their bomb shelters as these ballistic missiles came over to Israel and destroyed entire neighborhoods. But sadly our mainstream media didn't show us the death and destruction caused by these Iranian ballistic missiles that targeted Israel's population centers.
Well, of course, Iran is behind all the terrorism that takes place. And that's the modus operandi, isn't it, to actually go in and kill people, because their aim isn't to take Israel, the territory. Their aim is to kill Jews, and that's exactly what they were trying to do. Unfortunately, Israel was able to stop them killing more than just a few Jews. I have to again take truck with you about the Iran deal. The Iran offense. So basically, Israel was fighting 8 fronts, if you talk about the media. And to actually decisively win 8 fronts simultaneously is almost impossible. And I think that I met Netanyahu in London when he first came to London to talk about Iran in the late 1980s, I think it was. Still have a big brochure about it. So it's been in the making for this long. And the fact that they got out there and in 12 days were able to incapacitate Iran. Had they bombed all the nuclear material, I just wonder what the fallout would have been. Would the water be contaminated, and et cetera, and how many people would have died from that? So I think there had to be a bit of caution about how much they could bomb. I think they also had to, Netanyahu was smart enough to give America all the kudos for it. Israel's quite happy to lay the ground for people, and America needed the kudos. Why? Because Israel needs to keep America on board. And how do you keep them on board? Not just the president, but all the people. The people need to see, oh, we had a victory. We didn't go into a war that we were drawn into and we lost. So here we come with our planes, we drop a few bombs, and we're the heroes. So I think, of course, somebody's going to have to go back into Iran. I think that Israel could not destroy the leadership. You cannot go into another country and destroy the leadership of that country. That would have been disastrous.
And there was one famous joke that was going around in June, and that was that no one knows where the supreme leader Khamenei is, but the Israelis.
Exactly.
And which was very much an Israeli joke.
Yeah.
Moving on to July and August of 2025. This is where we saw literally the blood libels being accused against Israel. International media and attention focused off Israel's 12-day crisis and confrontation with the Iranian regime and shifted back to Gaza. This is where Israel was accused of deliberately starving the people of Gaza by preventing international aid getting through. And we saw international condemnation of Israel's war against Hamas in Gaza. and we have a video to go to now that fully explains how journalism perpetuated the lie of a blood libel, saying that Israel was deliberately causing a policy of starvation in Gaza.
Fake news are spreading again. This isn't starvation, it's cystic fibrosis, a genetic illness. Israel already facilitated this boy's medical transfer to Italy back on June 12th. This is what he looks like today after treatment. But his image, and several others like it, are still being misused to push a lie. This isn't journalism, it's a modern blood libel against Israel, spreading Hamas's propaganda.
That was courtesy of our friends at the Israeli Foreign Ministry. Now, Sharon, never have I been in a time of broadcasting and been involved in journalism where I've seen the lies and the extent of lies coming out from our mainstream media, coming out from our own government, accusing Israel of deliberately starving the Gazans, preventing international aid from getting through. And of course, we saw that young boy who was a toddler who had a degenerative disease, saying that this was a direct result of starvation. But thanks to our friend David Collier, who exposed all those lies, found out that this boy had a degenerative disease and had nothing to do with the lack of aid in Gaza. Just share how the international community jumped on this bandwagon, even our own Labour government, to accuse Israel and to lie about the situation in Gaza.
Well, that's the nature of propaganda, isn't it? You make an image that is attractive to people and they jump on it and they don't bother to read about it or to look very hard. It wasn't very difficult to see all of those photographs were manufactured. They were all photoshopped. It wasn't very difficult to see that those kids actually were ill. It was quite obvious, and in today's age, when you talk about social media, everybody could press Google or Perplexity or ChatGPT, and they could actually find out exactly who these babies are because they were around. Those pictures were around even before, and they were used in sort of studio type arenas to show. Even the lighting, you could see that these were created, the way the ladies were dressed with their robes and so on. It was all created very theatrically. You know, Simon, that in 2015 we had a very, very big program about the BBC propaganda. And if we fast forward now, we actually see it in what they've done to President Trump. We saw what the Panorama program also did to other people. I won't name them here. So these blood libels have been going on. We did a program on a blood libel, for instance, when they were to try and expose the blood libels. So it's not, it's something that's been going on for years and years and years and just getting worse.
Absolutely. And moving on to September, sadly our shameful British government then announced that it was going to recognise a unilateral Palestinian state without even having the condition that Hamas had to release the remaining Israeli hostages. Share with us as British Christians how shameful this government actions were to recognise a unilateral Palestinian state without even having to cease hostilities against Israel or even release the hostages that Hamas had.
Well, if you look at the circumstances in which Keir Starmer made the announcement, it's clear to many people that there was a competition going on between him, France, and Canada as to who was going to get the announcement out first. But setting that aside, I mean, how do you recognize a state that doesn't exist? Because according to the Montevideo Convention, Palestine doesn't fit the bill on any of the criteria for the creation of a new state. And it's not the UN's business anyway to create new states. So I think for me, looking at this from a biblical perspective, all that our Prime Minister has done as leader of the government of this nation is stoke up judgment upon us from the God of Israel. It may take time, it may come suddenly, who knows, but it will come because of this man's, how can I put it, foolishness in going down this route.
Absolutely.
And what's been the benefit of it? Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
And Sharon, sadly we saw in Manchester on the holiest day of the Jewish calendar on the 2nd of October 2025 that hideous Islamist terrorist attack at Highton Synagogue in Manchester. Share with us your thoughts and the impact that had on Manchester's Jewish community, but also your Jewish community in London as well.
I think it's had an impact on all of us. To think that, I mean, I live virtually across the road from a synagogue. And I know the people who stand guard there, and they're not prepared for this. I think it's a shame on our country that they expect unarmed citizens who are not trained as any form of police to actually stand outside and face this kind of terror. That our government is saying, oh, well, we'll give you some more money, we'll get CST to put a few 50-year-old men with paunches out there to look after you, instead of saying we're going to send some police there because you are British citizens and you deserve to be looked after just like everybody else is looked after in this country. It's a shame on our Prime Minister. He exacerbated the situation by recognising this fantasy land called Palestine. He should resign. He's playing student politics with our country.
Absolutely. And of course, also we saw in October, didn't we, was the return of the 20 remaining Israeli hostages, which was the first time I think Israelis actually smiled in 2 years. There was incredible joy, incredible jubilation at the return of these living Israeli hostages who'd come back to their loved ones. But of course, Israel had to pay a high price in the number of Hamas terrorists and other Islamist terrorists had to release with blood on their hands for the release of these 20 remaining hostages.
Yeah, and this is the story every time. That doesn't get mentioned with Gilad Shalit. It was Sinwar who was released. What does he do? He's the chief planner, motivator behind October the 7th. Who knows what some of these hundreds and thousands who've been released from Israeli prisons will go on to do. Yeah.
Moving on to December, Sharon. Of course, December will always be known now as the Hanukkah massacre on Bondi Beach, the biggest mass terrorist attack in Australia's history. And 1,000 Jewish people were on the beach on Bondi Beach to celebrate the first evening of Hanukkah. Share with us how horrific that terrorist attack by our father and son who just had these high caliber rifles from a bridge and just went on a mad shooting spree.
Well, if you avoid the mainstream media and you go onto social media, you will know that Australia has been building towards this. There's been a lot of disregard for the Jewish people in Australia for a very long time. There's a reporter called Avi Yamini who's been exposing them. And every time he went as a social media journalist, he would be arrested, much like happens elsewhere. So it's not totally unexpected, but it's devastating to think that on Hanukkah, when we all know what Hanukkah means, that this attack should take place and that there was no security. So there are a lot of questions that need to be answered, but I fear that it's not the end of it. I fear that this year has ended with an entry into 2026 with an unknown and what's going to happen, and are the Jews actually going to make Aliyah, leave Australia, leave Britain, leave Europe?
No, these are the big questions, aren't they?
Yeah.
So we got less than 5 minutes going in now, looking at the year ahead for 2026. We know, Robin, there's going to be a very important general election in Israel. Will Benjamin Netanyahu run again? If he does, will he win again? Big question marks over that. The nature of Israeli politics after the horrors of October the 7th, how will that impact on how the Israelis decide to vote? And of course, as Sharon mentioned, that we are probably seeing a continuation of that Jew hatred with a big question mark. Does British, Australian and Canadian and also West European Jewry have a future? Are we going to see a mass exodus? And of course then as well, the reconstruction of Gaza, what's that going to look like? And can the West keep Hamas out of Gaza to rebuild it?
Oh, Simon.
All of the above.
All of the above and more. All of the above and more. I mean, the Pandora's box, to use that old expression, the lid is blown off, never mind opened, as far as Jew hatred is concerned. That's not going away. Sadly, we might want it to, but it's not going away. For social media, for organizations that are funding and pursuing this whole vendetta against Israel and the Jewish people, that's not going to lessen. I mean, that's the reality. Whether that sparks Aliyah, I think that's more than likely, at least on the part of some members of the Jewish community in most Western nations, because the sense is that these are the reports that are coming back, that more and more Jewish people are actively considering doing this because they realize they cannot live as Jewish people openly in the Western societies in which they currently reside. Now, Israel recently had a practice run, for want of a better word, in the last couple of weeks on receiving up to 800 Jewish people per week making Aliyah. They tested the systems. So even in Israel, that's a seed shift. That's a seed shift in thinking. They're preparing, I think, for a mass exodus out of the West to Israel itself. And although it will be an absolute, utter loss to this nation if a high proportion of the Jewish people leave here, from a biblical perspective, we see that this is something that the God of Israel seems to want to happen, but it will be a total loss to this nation if that happens. And it will be part of God dealing with us as a nation for us not standing with Israel and the Jewish people in Israel itself and the Jewish people who live in our communities here in the UK.
Absolutely. And Sharon, with about a minute and a half left, how can a Christian stand with Israel and your community, the Jewish community, in 2026?
Well, I think we're seeing the prophecies acting out, aren't we? And the storms in Israel are, I think, quite indicative of that. How can we act this way? I think I've had a lot of messages from people commiserating with me about what happened on Hanukkah in Australia. And I think that's very welcome. Obviously, it's very nice to know that people care. But I think we have to work together. There are 15 million Jews in the world. Cannot fight alone against this globalized intifada. The Christians and the Jews, the Christians have to be Christian, re-embrace their churches, go back into their churches, stop selling them for pubs and mosques, and they have to work with the Jews together to save Western civilization.
Amen. That's a great way to end the programme. So Sharon and Robin, thank you so much for a great programme, and Happy New Year to you both. And I want to thank you for watching this news review of 2025, and I want to wish you all a wonderful new year as we all embrace 2026, which promises to be dramatic, it promises to be eventful, but we also have to remember that Israel is the apple of God's eye, and that history is God's story, and he is the architect of world events and developments. So he's in control and he's sovereign. So thank you for watching today's Middle East Report.